Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Federal party leaders butted heads last night in the English language debate at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. While it was their last chance to impress voters, it was also a first for APTN. Brett Forster was there.
The totem poles towering above the podiums were a subtle indication there'd be no avoiding Indigenous issues as 5 federal party leaders vying to lead the country faced off.
You can't take a knee one day if you're going to take Indigenous kids to court the next. That's not leadership.
Mr. Singh,
that's
you
not
love that line about taking Indigenous kids to court. It's actually not true.
There were a few exchanges like this during an at times fiery contest. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau found himself on the defensive several times. And for the first time in the event's history, APTN was there to grill the leaders. Melissa Ridgen asked the incumbent Prime Minister why he deserves a third mandate.
Canadians and Indigenous people are losing patience with the lack of results from all of this spending. So I guess the question is, why would they believe you a third term, that they would get results and you would be accountable for all that spending?
In response, the Liberal leader stood by his record.
When we came into office, there were 105 long-term boil water advisories. We lifted 109 of them, and for each of the ones that are remaining, we have a project lead, a project team, and an action plan, and we are going to lift those all.
Ridgen asked the leaders about clean drinking water, treaty rights, dismantling the Indian Act, and responding to the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole opposed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and promises to crack down on blockades. Economic reconciliation is the center of his platform.
What I want to do as Prime Minister is build that type of nation-to-nation dialogue and partnership so that the next generation has intergenerational wealth and opportunity transfer, not trauma. And building that trust will be core to me.
The torrent of racist abuse nurses hurled at Joyce Echaquan as she lay dying in hospital prompted demands for reform. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet had this to say when asked about systemic racism in the province.
I recognized the existence of systemic racism in June 2020. And then what happened? It became a political tool against Quebec.
His comments got a strong rebuttal from Green Party leader Annamie Paul, who also targeted Trudeau.
It seems all too often that reconciliation is treated like a buffet. You can opt in for this, pick this plate, but not the other one. And that applies to what we've seen with Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals.
But the Liberal leader refused to sway, saying those who criticize him are being cynical.
Unfortunately, the cynicism that Mr. Singh is showing on saying we did nothing is harming reconciliation and the path we're moving forward.
But Singh brushed off the accusation briskly.
I mean, it's a pretty ludicrous thing to say. What's damaging reconciliation is Mr. Trudeau looking Indigenous people in the eyes and saying, I'm going to deliver clean drinking water, and then breaking that promise.
Despite the joust, no clear winner emerged. Advance polls open today, and only 10 days remain until the vote. Brett Forster, APTN National News, Ottawa.
For more reaction on last night's English language leaders debate, we're joined by Negon Sinclair, a professor and columnist at the Winnipeg Free Press. Negon, thanks for being with us here today. What are some of the takeaways for you from last night's leaders debate?
Well, Justin Trudeau was clearly rattled and had been rattled by several attacks, but I think the most pertinent moments were Jagmeet Singh's comment that you can't take a knee and then also take kids to court. I think that was probably one of the highlights of the night in terms of understanding Trudeau's approach to Indigenous issues. But then probably, I think, the most pivotal moment of the night was really when Trudeau chastised APTN reporter Melissa Ridgen by saying that she wasn't positive enough, or perhaps that she wasn't progressive enough, in that the cynicism was what's infecting this government, when in fact it's really been Justin Trudeau's worst enemy is Justin Trudeau.
Now, there was an entire reconciliation segment with Melissa Ridgen, an Indigenous reporter asking questions. The debate was available in 3 Indigenous languages. Do you see this as a win, or is it more about, it's an about time situation?
So historically, every national debate and frankly every federal election has kept Indigenous peoples out of the room. For the first time last night, we saw Indigenous peoples in the room, meaning asking questions. And instead of talking about Indigenous peoples, federal leaders had to speak to an Indigenous person, in fact, to a few throughout the night. So that's a win. That's, of course, not involving Indigenous peoples in government. That's where reconciliation truly lies. So we haven't come that far, but I think it's an important moment to take a pause and to realize that last night was a big step.
So what do you see as the ballot box question or questions for Indigenous people planning to vote in this federal election?
Oh, I think that undoubtedly there was evidence laid bare that the best situation for Indigenous peoples is really what we've had the last minority parliament. We've gotten more bills, more laws put into place, more racist legislation reduced, not eliminated, but reduced, when the Liberals are in power and the NDP are in their ear or controlling the balance of power in that parliament. And likely we're going to see more of that coming into the future. It's just a matter of how much support will Jagmeet Singh get. I think certainly Trudeau's looking at reducing his government, reducing his seats, if all polls point to that. And unless there's a major turnaround, we'll be seeing another minority parliament, hopefully with the Liberals being held to account by the NDP. Because frankly, if you look at the Conservative platform is full of hypocrisy. And, Aaron O'Toole's best performance last night was during the segment on Indigenous issues because he said the least. Because those are the areas that platform has the most amount of problems. For instance, criminalizing people for standing in public infrastructure, expressing their legal rights, or the hypocrisy involving promising on one level on the land learning, but then promising to ramp up massive economic extraction projects like pipelines and mines across the country. I mean, the Conservative platform is a mess when it comes to Indigenous peoples. And so I think the best case scenario is a Liberal government with the NDP holding the balance of power.
All right, Negon, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for taking a few minutes out of your day today to speak with us.
Yeah, miigwech, thank you.
The federal leaders' debates were held this week in Gatineau in French and English, but there were also many other languages available, like Cree. Sheila North is the former Grand Chief of MKO, an organization that represents 26 First Nations communities in Manitoba's north. She was one of many who were watching the leaders' debate in Cree on APTN. North says it was important to hear the language at the debates.
It was very cool, but also very empowering to see our language now being acknowledged in this way. To me, it's an acknowledgement of the importance of our languages. So it was good to see. Of course, I would love to have seen it in other platforms and mainstream and all that, but this is a really good start. I think that we've come a long way to acknowledging the importance of Indigenous people in these lands, and this is one way, modern way to see that.
Federal election candidates from one of the biggest ridings in the country in terms of size, but one of the lowest in population, faced off in a local debate. APTN's Michelle Carlenzig traveled to northwestern Ontario riding of Kenora to get to know the candidates and their platforms.
The electoral riding of Kenora is home to over 40 First Nation communities. Yesterday, the political candidates for this region gathered to debate in the city of Kenora, where 1/3 of the riding population lives.
Last election, our riding voted for a new generation of leadership, for someone that would be a strong voice for our region and fight for the supports that we need. And it has been an honor for me to be able to fill that role.
Eric Malello, the incumbent MP, represents the Conservatives, who have always had a strong vote in the area. In fact, Kenora is a swing riding. It has flip-flopped back and forth from Conservative to Liberal since its creation in the early 2000s. David Bruno is the new Liberal candidate running this year. The NDP have also always held a strong vote, and their new candidate is Indigenous. Janine Seymour is an Anishinaabe lawyer from Sioux Lookout.
And we need to remember that the people of Northwestern Ontario aren't just who is here in the room right now. There are so many people who are active, interested, engaged, care, love their community, but aren't able to be here. So I'm hoping that this message too will get further up north as the voices carry.
The debate tackled a range of topics that related to Indigenous people, like homelessness and climate change impacts. Since roughly half the population in the riding self-identify as Indigenous, their vote has a big impact. The problem, says Cora McGuire-Cyrette, is with their access to polling stations.
Here in the north, transportation is a major issue. It's an issue in order to access healthcare, in order to access, your family, to access the vote, right? Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to walk 3 to 8 hours in order to vote? We need to really look at how the electoral system is set up for whose vote matters, and because every Indigenous vote matters.
McGuire-Cyrette also says women's safety and healing in Northern Ontario should be at the top of federal parties' concerns.
There's a real opportunity here for the leadership and for political will to come in and to say that, yes, Indigenous women's safety matters. Not only safety, but also and community healing.
Current polling suggests that the Conservatives are in the lead for Kenora, with the NDP in second and Liberals in third. Michelle Carlenzig, APTN National News, Ontario.
The Yukon doesn't have any Indigenous candidates for the upcoming federal election, so APTN's Sarah Connors asked Yukon advocacy groups what their priorities are. As she tells us, First Nations education and addictions issues are top of mind.
The Yukon federal riding is about the size of Spain, but only has one member of parliament in the House of Commons. That's because just over 30,000 people live in the whole territory, only 23% of which are Indigenous. There are 5 candidates running in the upcoming federal election, all Yukoners, but none are Indigenous. It's nothing new. 2019's federal election also had no Indigenous candidates. So we asked advocacy groups that work with Yukon First Nations what issues they want prioritized. Education is one of them. This year, only 68% of First Nations students graduated from high school. Only 3 out of 10 First Nations students will make it to grade 12, and only 1 of those 3 will go on to post-secondary. It's an issue that was brought up at a recent all-candidates forum hosted by the Council of Yukon First Nations.
How would you address the education gaps faced by Yukon First Nations children and youth? And how would you support First Nation-led solutions, such as a school?
We are now, one of the regions that has the poorest educational achievement outcomes.
Melanie Bennett is the executive director for the Yukon First Nations Education Directorate, an Indigenous-led organization dedicated to improving the success outcomes for First Nations students. Its funding relies on the federal government. She wants the next MP to help the directorate change the current model.
My request would be to have someone at the federal level, A, advocating that change has to happen, and B, put the money behind it.
She's hopeful the next MP will support the directorate in developing a First Nations school.
Other regions have their own schools, and we don't here. And we need a school. It's long overdue. It's very difficult to hear a federal government in Canada saying that we want to bring equity for First Nations across Canada. We don't have that in Yukon.
Jill Alhus is the program manager for Blood Ties, a harm reduction organization in Whitehorse that works with many Indigenous Yukoners. She says since 2016, 47 people have died from drug overdose in the Yukon.
I think one of the biggest things that we would like the federal government to work towards is the decriminalization of drug possession. It's a harm reduction tool that's been shown to be very effective in reducing harms.
Housing is another issue for Blood Ties clients. Alhus says unavailability and unaffordability of housing leaves drug users in vulnerable situations.
I know we have a housing crisis here in the Yukon, which affects many of our clients as well, so it would be great to see the federal government put in place new supports for people who use drugs who are also impacted by the housing crisis.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
All right, we need to step aside for a short break, but still ahead, 2 northern BC communities faced allegations of racism in city councils this year. Welcome back. As accusations about systemic racism in federal politics swirl, smaller races are not immune. 2 northern BC communities faced allegations of racism in city councils this year that led to the resignation of the City of Terrace's first Indigenous city councillor. She's now supporting an Indigenous candidate for a council seat in the community of Puskapi. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
Jessica McCallum Miller is from the Gitxsan Nation. She grew up in Kispiox in northern BC. She had a passion for politics at a young age. In high school, she started a council for youth. In 2018, McCallum Miller was elected the first Indigenous councillor and the youngest for the City of Terrace. It was a proud moment, but from the start, she says she faced opposition on issues she felt important to her and surrounding First Nation communities.
Some very derogatory comments made by a city councillor that was my colleague about surrounding First Nations. And I became irate, I became upset. The rest of council was very complacent with this behavior.
McCallum Miller says there's more conflict after she did an interview with City Council on violence against Indigenous women. She said an ethics complaint was filed against her by a councillor, and then she was threatened to be barred to speak to media and put on leave. In February, McCallum Miller resigned from City Council to protect her mental health.
At that time, I felt very suicidal. I'm okay now. My spirit is healing. But it's that kind of racialized censorship, that kind of colonial power structure that Indigenous peoples have to deal with constantly.
The City of Terrace sent an email statement to APTN News detailing the steps they made since McCallum Miller's resignation. The RDKS has planned for 4 additional sessions with other local First Nations over the next several months, and we look forward to participating. In addition, the Council took part in a day of diversity inclusion workshop in February of this year with KVI. It was a good opportunity for our Council to learn and reflect. McCallum Miller is sharing her support for Richard Binault, a Treaty 8 member who is running for a Village of Puskapi council seat. In early 2021, the Puskapi Mayor McKetty faced calls for her resignation after racially insensitive posts became public. She did not resign. Several councillors did resign, leaving a seat open for election in late September. In an email statement to APTN News, Mayor McKetty states that she completed cultural sensitivity training. Minault has been one of the mayor's harshest critics. He says the past 6 months have been difficult.
Personal attacks, the signs. I've had to go to the police station twice, the RCMP twice, to put some information in the file that I have opened. All these things that have happened to me in the last 6 months are a direct result of my challenging a person who is deemed to be a racist politician.
Minault says he's going to move ahead and try to create change and bring awareness to Indigenous issues.
I will not back down. I'm going to continue to run. And from what I'm gathering in the village of Puskapi, I do have a lot of support. Enough support where I am confident that I have a very good chance of gaining a seat on that council.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Terrace.
We need to take one final break, but when we come back, we'll show you today's photo of the day. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Our very own Jason LaRue caught this rainbow over the site of the federal debate in Gatineau, Quebec. Hopefully one of the leaders will be a pot of gold for voters. Beautiful night and a great shot, Jason. Send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. And now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Beginning in the east, 19 and rain in Charlottetown and 20 in Fredericton. 11 degrees and rain in Nain and 10 degrees in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 21 in Quebec City and 19 in Val-d'Or. 22 in rain in North Bay and 27 in sun in Sarnia. Rain and 12 in Big Trout Lake and 17 in Sioux Lookout. 9 and rain in Churchill and 10 degrees in Puckawagan. 19 in sun in Dauphin and 15 in Barons River. 17 in North Battleford and 19 in Estevan. 13 in Uranium City and 16 in Buffalo Narrows. Over in the west, 21 in rain in Peace River and 14 in Fort Chipewyan. 16 in rain in Lethbridge and rain in 17 in Edmonton. 21 in rain in Quesnel and 18 in rain in Bella Coola. Rain in 13 in Dease Lake and 15 in Smithers. More rain and 11 in Rock River and 12 in Old Crow. A mix of sun and cloud and 18 in Norman Wells and 18 in Wrigley. 14 in rain in Fort McPherson and 11 in Colville Lake. -1 in Cambridge Bay and 5 degrees in Chesterfield. -2 in Arctic Bay and -3 in Resolute. The Heiltsuk Nation is mourning the loss of Hereditary Chief Edwin Newman. The respected leader started his journey to the spirit world on September 5th. He was 95 years old. Chief Edwin Newman was a hereditary chief and a spokesperson for the Heiltsuk Nation. He was a powerful speaker known for a wonderful smile. His accomplishments include being an elected chief councillor, president of the Native of British Columbia, and an Indigenous magistrate. He was also a residential school survivor. He leaves behind his wife, Ada Vera Newman, their children, and many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation in Quebec is grieving the sudden death of one of their leaders. Grand Chief John Boudreas was the head of a tribal council that represents the interests of 7 Algonquin communities. He was 51 years old. Boudreas wrote on his Facebook wall on September 7th that he was in the hospital for a lung infection and that he had taken a COVID-19 test. His death was confirmed on Thursday. Elected last May, the man affectionately known as Big John was lauded for promoting unity amongst his nation. Tribal Council Vice Chief Savannah McGregor, who will be serving as interim Grand Chief, says Boudreas will be greatly missed.
Shock and in grief right now, and we lost not only our Grand Chief, John Boudreas, but our friend, brother, someone who paved a great way and had a beautiful vision and the force behind that vision to move it forward. And I send all my deepest sympathies to his family.
Our condolences go out to both of the families. That's going to do it for this Friday edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.